Test, test, test. السلام عليكم. طيب، بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا والحقنا بعبادك الصالحين. So, Assalamu alaikum everybody, and welcome to the first in what I anticipate to be a very long series. What we'll accomplish today, inshallah, I'm going to go through an introduction to what this series is going to be over maybe a year, how long it will take, and what's the scope, what's the motivation for us to speak about this topic, what are some of the lessons that we seek to derive, and what are some of the learning objectives of this course. After that, I want to get into what was the state of Arabia right at the death of the Prophet ﷺ. So before I get into the rest of the learning objectives, let's start with what is this series. So this series is, as you guys saw in the title, it's the history of the 5 Khulafa. Starting with Abu Bakr radiallahu an, Umar radiallahu an, Uthman radiallahu an, Ali radiallahu an, and finally with Al-Hasan, his short-lived khilafah of about 8 or 9 months. Did not last very long before he abdicated to Muawiyah. Now, let me start with why I want to speak about this period of history in particular. I did not choose this topic randomly. I think it's extremely important. Out of maybe 10 things that I was thinking about what I could do for Masjid Al-Izz, when we were just starting this program, we're starting, it's an exciting time for the masjid, right? Like, we could be doing stuff about all kinds of different topics, and inshallah, we're going to have a wide diversity of things to be learning about. But I chose this not because it's one good option out of many. I chose this topic for a very specific reason, which is that we as Muslims, I don't know about you guys, but I'm somebody who lives to recall back for the reestablishment of the Khilafah. And I cannot do that unless I really understand what I'm calling to. I really understand the system that existed in reality in the past. The Khulafa al-Rashidin. These 30 years, brothers and sisters, is one of the most important 30 years for us to understand. Of course, it's not as important as the seerah. The seerah is more important than what we're going to learn today. But why did I not choose the seerah? Because I think many of my audience would have known at least the major beats of the seerah. They will know, okay, what happened in Revelation, the boycott, and then, had these, how did the Prophet ﷺ do his da'wah, and then, you had the hijrah, and Uhud, and Badr. So the major beats, if you don't know the major beats of the seerah, this is probably not the class for you. I expect there are aspects of the seerah that I will clue you in on once they become necessary to understand as prerequisite knowledge for what happened in the geopolitical situation in these next 30 years. Because there's lots of things that you have to know what happened. What did the Prophet ﷺ do with this tribe or that tribe that caused them to do this or that? And we're going to get into that. But you should have a basic understanding of what happened in the seerah. The other reason is that I feel that there's much less content on this period of history. There's lots of seerah lessons out there. There's lots of YouTube out there. Muslim Blueprint, if you take the Muslim Blueprint program, you're going to learn the major beats of the seerah, especially from that Islamic lens. But I don't feel that many people are giving the real political Islamic lens to this period of history, which is when Islam expanded. And we really saw the system in action for about 30 years as it was intended by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. After these 30 years, Khilafah persisted, but in a kind of diminutive form. There was some flaws with it, especially when it came to how do we choose the Khalifa, right? What makes Khilafah Rashida? Not just that they established the Sharia, but that the Khalifa is chosen according to Shura, which is what happened with all of these 5 Khulafa, from Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu to Al-Hasan. So I'll go back to what I started with, which is that, us as Muslims, us as revivers, it's going to take a generation to reestablish Islamic civilization. But it doesn't take a generation to establish it in your mind. My goal with this lesson, with this series of lessons, not today, but we're not going to accomplish the goal today, but we're going to accomplish the goal over time, is to build an imagination, a visualization for the Islamic civilization in your mind. I want to immerse you in the wisdom of the past, in the personalities of the past, in the exploits. What did people value? What did people, consider to be good, 1300 years ago? I want you, if at least, we don't have an Islamic environment in the real world, we should have an Islamic landscape of ideas in our head, our garden of thoughts. We need to just fully immerse ourselves in our history, brothers and sisters. I think many of us, and I count myself in this category, we know Western history more than we know Islamic history. And that informs your worldview. That informs how you think about the good. That informs who your role models are. So I really hope, inshallah, that people can come to this session week after week. And I intend to be very deep. I don't intend to just tell stories that are selected haphazardly. I intend to tell a deep telling of this period of history. My main sources are Ali al-Salabi's books and Ibn Kathir's Al-Bidayah wa Nihaya. So Ali al-Salabi, he wrote 5 books for these 5 Khulafa. I'm going to go through them, not necessarily in the order he goes in. I'm going to use it as a primary resource. And his books are very comprehensive, but not as detailed as Al-Bidayah wa Nihaya by Ibn Kathir. So I'm going to use that also as a resource. But Ali al-Salabi is very good at kind of tying together a narrative. Okay? So I'm going to be working through these 2 resources and some other resources. These are resources, of course, in the Arabic language. And I'm going to bring them into kind of an English content sphere. Okay? So that's the scope. That's the sources. I hope people understand why this is very, very important for us to learn. Anybody have any questions so far about just like what this course is about? Now, I did think about like having quizzes and stuff. I don't know if I'm gonna have time for it, but if anybody wants to volunteer to like attend this regularly, take notes, and make quizzes for people, I think that would be very helpful and you would benefit a lot of people. This is a multimedia course, so it's not a course really, it's drop-in, it's a seminar. But this is as much as for you guys as it is for the people online. So if you can make this kind of material, you can not just benefit the 6 people in the room right now, but you can benefit the many people who are going to come in the room later and who are watching online. This stuff is going to be permanent online, and inshallah, this is what they call evergreen content. This is something that people can keep coming back to, especially if I do my job right and I really make a comprehensive history, okay? طيب. So let's talk about the state of Arabia at the time of the death of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the length of time that he spent in Medina was 10 years. From these 10 years, the Muslims went from a single city-state to conquering all of Arabia, the Arabian Peninsula. Does anybody know what was the breakover point? At which point in the seerah did the hockey stick effect happen, and did almost all the Arabian Peninsula came under the dominion of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? What was the one event that caused a flip? Anybody know? What's that? No. Yeah, dua. What's that? Exactly, Fath Mecca. Quraysh was like the ideological and economic capital of Arabia. It wasn't the formal capital, but because it had so much soft and hard power, when the Muslimin took over Quraysh and took over Mecca and Quraysh submitted, this was the sign for the rest of the Arabs. The sign that, okay, khalas, these guys are the top dogs. And the year 9 of after Hijrah is called let me see what this was called. Am al-Wufud. Am al-Wufud means the year of the delegates. The 9th year of the Hijrah, many of the Arab tribes, not all of them, many of the Arab tribes sent delegates to Medina, basically to make deals and to offer allegiance to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Among those, Banu Hanifa, Kinda, Banu Tamim, my tribe, represent. Bahrain tribes, Yemen tribes like Himyar, Hamdan, and many others. And some of these are very, very big tribes, especially Tamim is a very big tribe. And these all kind of took, the oath of allegiance to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Many Arabs tried to unite Arabia before the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. None of them succeeded. This was the first time in history the Arabian Peninsula was united by anybody. I want to maybe show you guys a map. I think in the future we're going to be able to use this screen, but for now, I don't know if the sisters are going to have to. I'll explain, what's on there. I don't know if you can zoom in on the screen here, but let's see what we have here. So this is a map I have of the, we're not best set up for this, of the tribes in Arabia, okay? As you can see, the geopolitical landscape of Arabia was very complicated. What Islam did, which was revolutionary, it eliminated tribalism as the basis for political organization. It didn't evaporate from how people organize themselves per se, but it evaporated like there was this kind of now supra-tribal level of organization, which was the Islamic organization, Islamic Imara. This idea now that we're not bonded by our tribe, our brother, our sister, our uncle, we are bonded by the bonds of Islam, regardless of who our tribesmen are. And that was a very hard thing to do in Arabia because this was the status quo in Arabia for centuries. For centuries, Arabs always behaved according to how the tribe leader saw fit. And they acted as a unit. The tribe was a unit. And this was also part of how Islam was able to succeed because it took advantage of this feature of tribalism. And many tribes converted to Islam en masse together. Okay? Another important thing to understand about the geopolitical landscape of Arabia at the time was the regional powers. What were the two regional powers in Arabia or surrounding Arabia at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Yeah, Persians and Romans. And in the English literature, they'll call them the Sassanids, and they'll call them the Byzantines. Okay, so these were the East and West, the big empires. And what you need to understand is that they would often sponsor Arab tribes. So just like today, where you have two superpowers, China and America, and each one of these superpowers finds little guys to kind of bring onto their team. And they become their kind of puppets. They fund them and they help them and so forth as long as they help them fight against the other superpower. Same thing in Arabia back then, especially in those tribes that were closer to the north and the east, because those tribes were closer to the powers, and you had tribes fighting each other basically on behalf of the Byzantines, on behalf of the Persians, right? But neither the Byzantines nor the Persians were able to fully permeate into the Arabian Peninsula. The Arabian Peninsula was harsh territorially. Tribal allegiances were very finicky. You know, the tribes were always very strategic in how they, set up things, and it was just not an easy land to unite from a political perspective, okay? Let me tell you some of the major tribes in Arabia at the time, okay? In Hijaz is the area that we know the best. Hijaz is the area in the west of Arabia with Mecca and Medina. And the most important tribes to know there are the Quraysh and their sub-tribes, okay? So there's some terminology we need to understand, and I'm not going to expect you to memorize this, but it's good to know, and maybe I'll keep reminding you guys. So a tribe, there's three kind of hierarchies to a tribe. You start at the top with a qabila. Qabila means tribe. An example of a qabila is Quraysh, okay? Below that, you have a batn. Batn means belly in Arabic. A batn is something like Banu Hashim, or Banu Abd al-Manaf, or Banu Makhzum. So these were like the clans of Quraysh. Below that, you have, needs to just check this. Anyway, below that, you had the immediate families of the people. You had maybe groups of 7 to 10 people. This was like an immediate or extended family that lived within a batn, okay? So, but the most important to know is the qabila and the batn. So let's talk about some of the major tribes in Arabia. In Hijaz, like we said, you had Quraysh and you had the Aus and the Khazraj in Medina. Aus and Khazraj, everybody needs to know what Aus and Khazraj are. Aus and Khazraj were the two tribes of the Ansar in Medina, okay? In Najd, you had the Ghatafan, which were a confederation of Banu Abbas, Murra, Ashja'. You had the Banu Tamim, which was one of the largest tribes, and Banu Hanifa. Banu Hanifa is going to become very important maybe in a few weeks from now when we talk about Musaylim al-Kadhdhab, because he was one of the false prophets that emerged after the death of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay. In Yemen, you had Himyar, you had Kinda, you had Hamdan. Himyar used to be the ruling kingdom of southern Arabia, okay? So they're very elite lineage, ancient lineage. Kinda, like I mentioned before, these were a very noble tribe that tried to unify central Arabia before, but they failed. In the east, you had Abd al-Qais, Bakr bin Wa'il. In northern Arabia, you had the Ghassanids. These were Christian Arabs that were allied with Byzantium. Okay? So, in the prophetic conquests, as the sister mentioned, on 20th of Ramadan, on the 8th year of the Hijrah, the Prophet ﷺ captured Mecca, and he captured it peacefully. There were very few deaths, basically just a few people that were on the list of the Prophet ﷺ. And this was the turning point for Muslims in Arabia. Okay, and as I mentioned, the Am al-Wufud happened after that, where many delegates came from the different tribes to pledge allegiance. After that was the Battle of Tabuk, which again really established Arabs in the region. And you had people like Ayla, Jarba, Dumat al-Jandal, which joined the Prophet ﷺ, these tribes which gave allegiance after, okay? So those were the prophetic conquests. Now, the next thing I want to get into, once now we kind of have a basic idea of what the state of Arabia was, you had a kind of fragile unity, because any unity that is new is fragile, right? And it would be tested after the death of the Prophet ﷺ. And this is what we're going to speak about later. But before I get to that, I want to talk about Abu Bakr. Who is Abu Bakr? Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu is going to be the main protagonist of our next maybe like few months at the minimum. Again, we're going through this very deep. So for us to get through the years of Abu Bakr, it might take us a couple or 3 months. So I want us to really know who he was. So I put together some biographical info of Abu Bakr. His full name is Abdullah bin Uthman bin Ammar bin Amr bin Sa'd bin Taym bin Ka'b bin Lu'ay bin Ghalib al-Qurashi al-Taymi. It's a long name. But most people don't know, of course, Abu Bakr is not a regular kunya, in the sense that he does not have a son named Bakr. Anybody know what Bakr means? Yeah, it's like a baby cow, or baby camel. And it's said that he was called Abu Bakr because he liked camels. He was known for his fondness for camels, okay? He shares a sixth ancestor with Ka'b. He shares a sixth ancestor with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That sixth ancestor is Ka'b. So the nasab of the Prophet is Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam bin Abdullah bin Abdul Muttalib bin Hashim bin Abd Manaf bin Qusay bin Kilab bin Murrah bin Ka'b. That Ka'b is a common ancestor of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Abu Bakr. So as you can see, they're pretty distant from a family perspective, because two people living in Mecca in the middle of the desert, that's kind of considered far. So let's talk about. So he was born after Am al-Fil. So Am al-Fil was the year when Abraha sent his camels to attack Mecca. This was famously the year that the Prophet ﷺ was born. Scholars differed over when exactly was Abu Bakr born, but the range is 2 to 3 years after Am al-Fil. So Abu Bakr radiallahu anh was 2 to 3 years younger than the Prophet ﷺ. Okay? Let's talk about some of his features. Physically, he was light-skinned. He was very thin, kind of like me. Well-proportioned, well-statured. Sometimes the sides of his beard was sparse, kind of like this. I was reading some of his description. I'm like, this sounds a lot like me. His eyes were deep set. His nose was aquiline. Again, like me, this is an aquiline nose where there's a kind of goes curves up like that. And his legs were lean. His nickname is As-Siddiq, and there's a hadith this comes from. It comes actually in many places in Quran and Sunnah, where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Uthman, Abu Bakr, and Ali, and Umar were climbing Uhud. This is a famous story. Uhud started to shake. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Uthbut Uhud, فإنما عليك نبي وصديق وشهيدان." Meaning, stay still, Uhud. Upon you is a prophet, a Siddiq, and 2 shuhada. So the 2 shuhada are, what's that? Umar and Uthman. And the Siddiq, of course, is Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anh. So this, we know there's a famous, people might know here the famous verse in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us the ranks of the believers. What's the ranks? Anybody know? Al-Nabiyyin, thumma Siddiqeen, Shuhada, Al-Salihin. So what is a Siddiq? A Siddiq is somebody who is better than the Shuhada, not as good as the prophets. The easiest way to understand a Siddiq is somebody who does the job of the prophets in establishing Islam without having the status of a prophet. They don't have the formal status of a prophet. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't make them a prophet, but they did the work of the prophet. So for Abu Bakr to have this rank of Siddiq, and then in the hadith it says the other 2 are Shuhada, this is one of the ways people say that Abu Bakr is the best Sahabi. All right, it's not something qat'i per se that Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu is the best Sahabi, but it's something that's widely accepted. Of course, he's one of the 10 Mubashirin bil Jannah. He's one of the only Sahaba who is mentioned in the Quran. Not by name. There's only one Sahabi that's mentioned by name, which is Zayd, yes. Radiallahu anh. But there's one Sahabi who's mentioned indirectly, who is Abu Bakr radiallahu anh. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls him Thaniya Thnain. He's the second of two. And the ayah is talking about when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was in the cave. Okay? So when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam made the hijrah, he made the hijrah with who? He made the hijrah with Abu Bakr. Right? So this is one of the honors that Abu Bakr has. Every Sahabi has, like, you can count several honors that they have. And one of the big ones for Abu Bakr is that he was the one who made that monumental pilgrimage, that monumental migration from Mecca to Medina with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was called the second of two. So Abu Bakr was a close friend of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam all throughout his life, even before Islam. And Abu Bakr was one of the elites of Quraysh. Like he came from a noble lineage, he was rich, he was well respected. He was really like somebody who was, you could say a top 1%er alpha person. The death of the Prophet ﷺ was on the Monday, on the 9th of Rabi' al-Awwal, on the 11th year after Hijrah. Okay? And one of the things that we're going to get more into next class is how was the successor of the Prophet ﷺ chosen? Because, like I said, any new unity is a very fragile unity. And the unity was really established of the Arabian Peninsula in the 9th year after the Hijrah. This means that there was only 2 years where the Prophet ﷺ was in charge before he died. That's a very, I want to kind of make sure that it's understood the level of crisis that this was for the Ummah. I don't know if it would be an understatement to say that this is or an overstatement to say, I don't think it is, that this is maybe the biggest test that the Ummah has ever faced, which was at that point. At that point, the biggest test that they ever faced was the death of the Prophet ﷺ. He kept everything together. He was the Nabi from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He was khayrul bariyah. He's the best of creation. And imagine anytime you have an issue, رُدُّوهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. Like, just send it back to Allah and His Messenger. The Messenger is there. He will judge between you with 100% accuracy according to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's revelation. Now the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam died. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not choose a successor. This is one of the things that confuses lots of people, and definitely people like the Shia deny. They say, oh, well, the Prophet ﷺ would never have left the Ummah in a situation like that. He would never have left the Ummah in a situation where there's no successor, where there's no person to carry out the affairs of the Muslimin. Right? But people like this misunderstand the deen, because the deen left the Ummah to choose who its ruler should be. So the only reason the Prophet ﷺ did not choose a successor is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not command him to do so. Allah did not give him the right to do so. So the Ummah, after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, had its first test. Okay, we need to choose a ruler. We need to choose somebody who's going to continue and keep this deen united, and keep the people upon Islam, and keep our lands, keep everything where it is. Like, things are very new. Islam is very new. Islam is, politically speaking, like since the revelation, it's 23 years old. Since Medina, it's only 13 years old. And for many of these tribes, it's 2 years old. Things can easily go back to zero. You have to understand that. If the Sahaba did not wrap their arms around the issue right then and there, things could have gone to zero. Things could have just like, and many empires in history were tested when their great leader died. We know, for example, when Alexander the Great died, his empire immediately fragmented. And nobody knows about his empire today. We only know the name Alexander. We don't know what empire he had. Genghis Khan, same thing. He died. His sons fought over the land and, immediately fractured and split. So, and then there are other empires in history, like the Roman Empire, when for example, Octavian Augustus died, it survived. So this was the test now for the Ummah. Immediately after the death of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, some from the Khazraj and met at Saqifat Bani Sa'ida. Saqifat Bani Sa'ida was the place that the Ansar would use to discuss political questions, to hold court, to do shura. And they met the Ansar together to try to choose a ruler from among themselves. And this was a little bit of a shock just to the rest of the Muslims, because the Prophet ﷺ still had not been buried. This was so quick. They moved very quickly to Saqifat Bani Sa'ida to start this discussion. So when the Muhajirun heard about this, they immediately went out to Saqifat Bani Sa'ida to meet the Muslims over there who were discussing this issue. And next class, we're going to get into like the politics of that discussion, what was said in that discussion, what cases were made, and who were the leaders that were proposed, and how were the tensions that happened at Saqifah Bani Sa'ida, how were those tensions resolved? But for now, I didn't intend to go too deep in the first lecture. I intended to kind of just create the expectation for what the course is about. I intended to set the stage of what Arabia looked like, who the key players were, who were the tribes, who was loyal to the Prophet ﷺ, how did the Arabian tribal political system work, and such setups. And then again, who was Abu Bakr radiallahu anh? We went through that briefly. Any questions so far? Yeah. 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 Very good question. The brother asked, what's the impact that I'm trying to get out of this course? Beyond just, learning the political reality of the time, the economic reality of the time. I really want to get deep into all the different moving pieces of Islamic civilization of the time. But so what's the impact for us today? What's the lesson learned? What's the outcome here? Well, we all as Muslims, we want to see a return to this kind of time. We want to see a return to Khilafah Rashida, to a rightly guided caliphate after Nabuwah. And if we want to, if this is what we want, if this is what Islam says we must have, and we understand that this is the only way in which the ummah can exist. Because what is an ummah, by the way? People don't know what the word ummah means. Ummah means jama'a musta'mara, a group that has an imam. Ummah and imam are related. So you need an imam for the ummah, and we don't have one. So when we understand this time period, when we understand, when we kind of gain like an understanding of how life looks like under Islam, then when we preach this to the world, to the Muslims, we can preach it with substance. Because I can explain to you guys in one class, it doesn't take a series, I can explain to you guys in one class what the mission of Islam is, and what the truth is about the world, what is the Islamic lens upon life, what is the political solution to the world's problems, and then you can go preach that. Doesn't take long to go preach that, but to go beyond just an answer and to have a real explanation and to be able to create an imagination in the people, you need to know our history. You need to be able to understand what you're calling for. If you're calling for, well, I want things to be like the time of Abu Bakr and Umar, radiallahu anhuma, but you don't know the first thing about that history. You don't know about the wars, you don't know about, what was the economic policy, you don't know about what the social dynamics were at the time, you don't know what did a day look like during these caliphates. How was the government organized? How was gender relations back then, men and women? Well, I want us to try to understand the world back then across all of these dimensions and really kind of get immersed into it. Yeah. Yeah. Well, a full blueprint of like what we should be doing today isn't going to be immediately gained from a study of history, right? So this is one piece of the puzzle. But in terms of, it seems like what you're asking is, what role does this piece of the puzzle play? Or are you asking how do we solve the puzzle? Yeah. So, yeah. Yeah. Well, what I mean by that is, right now, because we lived in the Western world, we live in a capitalist world, we live in a secular world, that's the only shape of life that we understand. When you think about life, when you think about government, when you think about politics, the only thing that comes to your mind is what you know, is what you've experienced, right? So we can either, wait around for us to have that Islamic civilization again and then go experience that, or we can go and learn what was already there. If we can immerse ourselves in the history and the stories, then we can gain an understanding of an alternative picture of life. That's the imagination I'm talking about. Like, for you to understand that life as it is right now isn't what it has to be. There's a different way it could be, from the political to the social to the spiritual. When all of those things kind of mesh together, imagine getting into a time machine and going back to the Khilaf of Abu Bakr, radiallahu anhu. What would it look like? What would it feel like? How out of place would you be? How long would it take you to acclimate and assimilate into how the people think and feel and act? This is the kind of thing that once you have an imagination for it, you could fit in right like that, if you did get into a time machine. Very good question. Any follow-up to that? No, I love this. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, very good question. He's saying Islam is timeless, so why do I need to understand Islamic history to be immersed in the Islamic mindset? Is that what you're asking? Kind of. Yeah, like today in the world today, we have Muslims. Yes, we have lots of Muslims, but is Islam established anywhere? Do we have Khilafah? Do we have an Islamic civilization? Do we have all the pieces moving together as Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam ordained? Masajids. Yeah. Masajid is very different from an entire system. It's a good thinking question, right? So, most people have this question. Like, a masjid does not regulate economy, it doesn't regulate law, it doesn't regulate crime and punishment. Once upon a time it did. Once upon a time, at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the masjid was a place for all of those things. Today, we have a masjid like this within a secular, capitalist, liberal economy. It's not an Islamic system. And so our entire worldview and culture and imagination is shaped by that which we exist in. So yeah, we are living there's like a drop of Islam in this bucket of sewage. What are you left with? You're left with a bucket of sewage. There's this saying, if you take a drop of wine and you put it into a bucket of sewage, you get sewage. If you drop a drop of sewage into a bucket of wine, you get sewage. I don't know if people understood that. So that means like even the places which people think are Islamic just takes a drop of sewage and they're not Islamic. Meaning Islam is a total system. You can't look at certain aspects of a place, certain trappings of Islam, and conclude that this is an Islamic environment. If a Sahabi saw this, what we have in our countries today, it would be unrecognizable to them. And I'm not talking about technology. I'm talking about how people think. I'm talking about how the government acts. I'm talking about its domestic and foreign priorities. So once we understand the history, that will all become super clear to us. I'm explaining it to you in the abstract. I'm giving you the theoretical answer, which is what I usually give to people. But now if we understand this history very well, we'll be able to paint a picture. And then when I paint the picture, it's very obvious. I don't have to explain to you the theory. You can look at it and be like, yeah, that's very different than what life looks like today. That's very different from how politics is done today. That's a very different worldview that informs how the entirety of society existed back then. So this is it's good that you're asking about it, because this is a big learning outcome that I intend to gain from the course. And I don't mean to just retell a cold history of facts, even though I do want this to be rigorous from a factual perspective. I do want people to get out of this the shape of life in an Islamic civilization. Any other questions? Yeah.
Just so I understand a little bit more, could you clarify what the biggest difference in thinking of the Sahabi versus the thinking of the average person is?
I mean, like I said to the brother, I can tell you or I can show you. Like if I tell you, you're gonna be like, yeah, okay, but you're still not gonna taste it until you see it, and that's the job of the course. So I would say to that, just keep coming, and you'll eventually find out for yourself. You know, there's this part in the Matrix movie where Morpheus tells Neo, "I can't tell you what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself." So that's my answer to you. Anybody else? Any other questions? Sisters?
We got some questions online.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Somebody's asking, could you please elaborate the military and economical circumstances of the government at the time the Prophet ﷺ died? Were we actively at war with anybody?
Yeah, so there were expeditions to Byzantium. The Prophet ﷺ had begun the war with the Romans. I believe things had gotten cold by the time the Prophet ﷺ died. But the main thing that we're going to be discussing in the next coming weeks is Hurub al-Ridda. This is going to be coming up, which is that almost immediately after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, the Islamic world will erupt into a civil war. And the Abu Bakr is going to have to fight that war, and he's going to win that war. So this is the main feature, the main kind of military political situation of the Ummah at the time. In terms of like how were things running, what were the decisions being made, that's all details we're going to get into. Yeah. There's an argument to be made that Ali had a very challenging one, because his struggles with Muawiyah and the civil war at the time, definitely it was, especially since Islam had not been established so deeply yet, and it was very new. Yes, there's a case to be made. Like I mentioned, things could have easily gone to zero if Abu Bakr did not make the right decisions at the right time. And even the Ummah before choosing Abu Bakr, like those few days, I'm telling you, like we're going to talk about this more next time. The Saqifat Bani Sa'ida situation. Things could have gone sideways. Any other questions?
There is another question. What was the military strength compared to the other big superpowers? Can a comparison be made to the Muslim countries of today versus the Western superpowers?
No, a comparison can't be made. There's a few different things that you have to consider, which is that um, one is that, again, because the tribes had just recently come into Islam, they were still being organized. This would happen mostly during the Khilafah of Umar radiallahu anh. Umar would take this peninsula and really galvanize it, really organize it and militarize and fight these Byzantines and Persians. And he would win. So part of the reason why that was able to happen was because they united the Arabian Peninsula. The Arabian Peninsula was like, you could think of it as a bunch of statelets, but states is not the right political terminology to use when it comes to tribes. Really, it was like they took these tribes and they made the first Arabian state. So this Arabian state was able to rival the Persians and the Romans within the region. Yes. A comparison cannot be made between individual Arab states today and superpowers like China and America. The power differential is way greater. Partly due to technology, partly due to economic strength differentials, infrastructure. There's a lot more that you have to get right today than you did have to get back then. Yeah. That's true. That's true. Sharia is our strength. But yeah, but more speaking about the material differences in power. Yeah. That's a good question. I'll do a little bit more on that one, and I'll present a deeper analysis for next class. Any other questions? Let me see if there's anything in my notes that I didn't discuss. If anybody has any question, just shout it out. Incorrect password. Okay. No. طيب, we can end early inshallah this week. We won't make the habit of that. Go ahead, Dua. It's a good question. I remember when Jordan Peterson debated Muhammad Hijab, he hit him with this. Like he's like, if you guys have this great religion and it's justice and it's unity and all this stuff, how come immediately things got ugly? Well, the answer to that is this is not a feature of Islam, it's a feature of human beings. Islam does not erase the human nature. So the fitan that occurred when the Hurub al-Ridda happened, for example, or when the first fitna happened after Uthman radiallahu anhu was martyred, or when the civil war happened during the time of Ali radiallahu anhu. These are not attributable to Islam, they're attributable to human nature. I mean, like you could say that that's a cop-out, but I would ask such a person, okay, give me, well, I don't know if that's the best answer. I would say Islam never made the claim of a utopia up to the failures of human beings to implement Islam. So that's really kind of That's the margin of error, the gap between Islam and the people's adherence and implementation of it. Yeah? Yeah, absolutely. Like, why is there sectarianism? Why is there conflict? Why Islam did not, Islam never was going to root out nifaq. Nifaq is something that existed at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The munafiqeen are always going to have their plots and their, their efforts to attack the Muslims and destabilize the Muslims. The other thing that I would say to that, Sister Dua, is that because of what Islam is trying to accomplish, it's going to feel the full brunt of the enemies of Islam. Those who are against the mission that it has of basically dethroning every tyrant, of throwing down every master and making everybody equally slaves of Allah. There's lots of people, as Al-Muthanna ibn al-Haritha radiallahu anhu said, he said to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you've come with a king, you've come with a thing that the kings hate. So this is something that lots of people have a vested interest in destabilizing. So the fact that Islam survived these efforts to destabilize it and these fitan and these issues is a mark for Islam, not a mark against Islam. The existence of such conflicts are an inevitable result of human nature and the interests that people have against Islam. The survival of Islam is a merit for it, is a sign of its ability to succeed. Can I answer your question? Do you have any better answer? Yeah. Yeah. No, I thought about that answer, but I stopped myself from giving that answer because I feel it's not the best. Islam is supposed to be unique. So if you say, well, everything else went bad in some way, that's like saying, well, okay, well, then Islam's just as much of a guess as everything else. That's what they'll say. Okay, yeah, you don't have something special. But so I didn't want to kind of frame it this way. I didn't feel it was because Islam is distinguished. It's distinguished. That other things failed. If we make it part of human nature, then yeah, that answers the question. And it's something that, just an idea. Islam is an idea, cannot override. It can help. It manages it, but it can't totally eliminate it. Yani we're all Muslimin here. We all pray. As-salatu tanha 'anil fahsha'i wal munkar. But we sin. How come? Well, there's a gap between what the prayer is supposed to do and your ability and your commitment to pray properly and to pray with khushu' and sincerity and so forth. If you met the standard that Islam set, then you would be free of fahsha and munkar. But the fact that you still have those things is just a gap between you and Islam. Yeah. Well, you're saying that the previous generation was better at that? Yeah. 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 It's a good question. It's a bit off the topic, but I guess. Nice tangent. Okay, I mean, like what your question reminds me of is the Sahwa al-Islamiyya, which happened in the late 70s. I'm thinking about where I came from. In my home country, nobody used to go to the masjid until there was something. I don't know if you know. How old are you? 30s. 40s, mashallah. So you don't remember the late 70s, do you? So I don't either. But that's the time when like there was a kind of global Islamic awakening, and people started, like in many countries, including my home country, coming back to the masjid. And I think when people get older, they go to the masjid more often. It's more of an old-young thing than it is a generation thing, I think. So the answer to the question of like, why aren't the youth in the masjid? It's a question that many have asked. I think the youth aren't inspired by Islam. I think that they see Islam as just kind of a set of rituals that are disconnected from life. And I think that's because many people explain Islam in a way that's exclusively ritualistic. They don't talk about a grand narrative of human progress that Islam offers. Right? Like this utopic vision that Islam says, elimination of poverty and injustice in the world due to the divine law, when we take God as sovereign. That's a big idea. Most people don't talk about it. Most people just kind of keep it basic. And I don't think that's basic. I think keeping it basic is speaking about the basic message of Islam, which is Tawheed, which is the sovereignty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if my message to Imams is speak about Khilafah and you'll get youth in the masjid. Okay, any other questions before we end? So barakallah feekum. Next class will be a full hour of, I'll try to keep it to maybe 50 minutes of lecture, 10 minutes of question and answer. And next class will really be Saqifat Bani Sa'ida, the bay'ah to Abu Bakr. What did the Ansar feel about that? What did the other tribes feel about that? The argument between Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu and Umar radiallahu anhu about the apostasy wars. That will be next class, inshallah. بارك الله فيكم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. جزاكم الله خير والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله.